Hi. I'd like to commence by acknowledging the Aboriginal owners of all the lands we are meeting on today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. The land I am standing on today is the land of the Gambian people, land in respect of which sovereignty has never been ceded. I would like to welcome everyone to this joint forum organised by the Willoughby Environmental Protection Association and the Nature Conservation Council. I'm John Moratelli, the President of the Willoughby Environmental Protection Association, WEPA, and WEPA is pleased to be able to be one of the co-hosts tonight. Greetings to those of you who are members and also to other participants. Please note this session is being recorded and the recording will be posted on the WEPA and NCC websites after the event. If you wish to catch up on WEPA's activities or support our work by becoming a member, the membership fee is $10 or $5 concession. You can find information on our website, the address for which will be posted in the chat. Please note that due to the number of people online tonight, you've all been placed on mute. Please make sure that you remain on mute. Only candidates and organisers will be asked to speak. This is done to control background noise. For those new to Zoom, you will find the chat button and other function buttons towards the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer. iPad users will find their function buttons by clicking at the top of their screen. At the bottom of the screen, you will see a microphone and camera icon. Please keep your camera on so that candidates can see the number of people who are on call, but mute your microphone. This will show as a slash through the microphone icon. After all the candidates are presented, there will be a Q&A where audience members can ask their questions. You can use the chat function to post your questions during the presentations. Our team will read out the chosen questions, but understand not every question will be able to be read out. Your question needs to be succinct, a question, not a statement, and it needs to be on an environmental issue. The chat is not to be used in a disrespectful way or to attack a candidate. Prosecute the issues, not the person. If anyone does behave badly, they will receive one warning. After that, if they continue with bad behaviour, they will be removed from the forum. Use the chat function to ask questions throughout the event. So you can start posting your questions in the chat function as early as you want. And also to let us know if there are any technical problems and to flag if you are having problems. Share your messages to everyone rather than use the private function. This will help us see where there are problems and so on. It will also enable everybody to see the questions that have already been put up by other people, so you're not all asking the same questions. If you're having problems getting onto chat, you can call Meredith. Her number is 0438 890902, and that number is going to be posted to the chat. I'm now going to hand over to our MC for the evening, Chris Gambian, who is the CEO of the Nature Conservation Council, and he will be introducing himself and the candidates. Thank you.
Thanks, John, and thanks everybody for being here tonight. It's my great pleasure to have been invited to MC tonight's proceedings, and what a fantastic event it is with so many locals from the North Sydney electorate deciding to come along and participate. And to get our candidates being prepared to give up their time to come and answer some of the questions of the people who will ultimately go and vote over the next couple of weeks leading up to Saturday the 21st of September. Goodness gracious. Saturday the 21st of May. I'm coming to you not from North Sydney because I live in the southern suburbs of Sydney on Biddigal land in Oakley, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. And I pay my respects to ancestors and elders wherever you are coming from, whether it's North Sydney or somewhere else across this great country. The Nature Conservation Council is the peak environment organisation for New South Wales. We've been around since 1955 a collaboration between all of the, or a lot of, 184 local environment groups around New South Wales, big and small, some statewide, some just local land care, bush care type groups, but everybody passionate about the nature in their area, the nature across the state, caring for the climate, caring for our rivers and waterways. And one of the things we like to do at the Nature Conservation Council is focus in and do the kinds of things that can't be done by any one group. So trying to represent the whole of the conservation movement across New South Wales. And it's fantastic work. So election time is really important time for us. Not because we're partisan, we are a very strictly non-partisan organisation, but of course you don't have to be partisan to be political, and anyone who cares about the issues that we're going to be talking about tonight needs to be political in some form. And a credit to all of the candidates who've put themselves forward in this election to try to make a difference in Canberra. I'm sure all of them are quite passionate about the things that they care about. The format for this evening is fairly straightforward. All of the candidates that are contesting the seat of North Sydney were invited to come along tonight. One of the candidates originally said he would be able to come along, but then has since had to pull out. That's Victor Klein. One other candidate, Leslie Kinney, did respond in the affirmative, but was too late to be included in tonight's proceedings. Unfortunately, the member for North Sydney declined our invitation to come along tonight. Make of that what you will. But we do have some fantastic candidates who've come along, and we're going to hear tonight from Catherine Renshaw from the Labor Party, William Bourke from the Sustainability Party, Kylie Tink, the Independent, and Heather Armstrong from the Greens. And I'm sure you've heard all about those people already as they get around and keep long hours and do all the things. I was a candidate myself in 2016 and 2019. So Kylie, Heather, William, Catherine, I sympathise with what you're going through at the moment, the very early mornings and very late nights. And I've got to tell you, my role in this election is pretty much voter, and it's a pleasant change from what I've been doing. So all power to you for making that effort. So each of the candidates are going to get 3 minutes to introduce themselves and give us their stump speech. And then there are 4 questions they've each been asked to answer. And they'll each get 8 minutes to answer those questions. And then if we have some time at the end, there'll be an opportunity for questions from the group, which you can do by putting into the chat. So without further ado, let me start. Now, the order that we've got tonight is the order that I just read out, and that was all drawn from a hat. So we'll stick to that order for the proceedings, which means our first candidate is Catherine Renshaw from the ALP. Do you want to introduce yourself, Catherine?
I do. Thank you so very much, Chris. It's wonderful to be with you, and thank you to the NCC and to WEPA for organising this forum. I'm speaking to you from Camaragal land here in Northbridge. I'd like to acknowledge and pay respects to the traditional owners of this land, and to note that this land was never conquered or ceded, and that justice for First Nations people is an ongoing project of which the Uluru Statement is a key part, and Labor's deeply committed to fulfilling the Uluru Statement, a voice, a treaty and a truth. To introduce myself, I might do something a little bit different, because I recognise some faces in the audience who are probably sick of the normal stump speech I've been given. So I'll tell you how I came to be standing for Labor in this election. I'm a long-time member of the party, but I have to say that my attendance at branch meetings had been quite slack over the past decade or so as I raised 3 kids and worked. But on February the 26th last year, the Royal Commission into Aged Care Safety and Quality handed down its final report, and it detailed a litany of abuses against older Australians that I found absolutely intolerable. I'm a professor of human rights law at Western Sydney University, and I was shocked and appalled at what was being described and horrified at the current government's lack of response to those issues. And then about a month later, I was marching along with tens of thousands of other Australian women in the March for Justice, for protection of women, for safety at work, for the implementation of the Jenkins Respect at Work reports. And I looked around at all these women marching and I thought, this is wonderful, us all out on the streets, but don't you all need to be in politics as well, making change where it counts? And then I thought, well, where am I? Should I be in politics as well? And so the Labor Party started talking to me about how the seat of North Sydney could be one that was taken seriously finally as a seat in contention at the next federal election.
Just 30 more seconds, Catherine.
And the final moment for me was the COP26 conference, when I was teaching a class and Scott Morrison was addressing the world and telling the world that Australia was not going to have a stronger 2030 target, and that the people who were going to decide our climate future weren't even in the room. And I saw my students' faces and realised I could no longer sit on the sidelines. So I'm very proud to be Labor's candidate in this election and looking forward to discussing Labor's climate policies with you all.
Thank you so much, Catherine, and good sticking to time there. Next up, we have William Burke from the Sustainability Party. Over to you, William.
Thanks for that. And I also want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which at least I meet here in Crow's Nest, the Camaragal people, and pay my respects. Thanks very much for putting on the event tonight and for everyone coming along and engaging in the most important issue that we have, which is the environment. If we don't have a healthy environment, we don't have a healthy society, we don't have a healthy economy or anything like that. So I'm a councillor and I'm the Deputy Mayor at North Sydney, and that's a huge privilege that I'm really enjoying since late last year. I've been a local resident in the electorate for over 20 years in Wollstonecraft and Neutral Bay in a couple of areas, but I'm a small business operator in Crow's Nest. But I got into politics and a really big light bulb moment for me was growing up on the urban fringe as I did, and the bushland was my backyard. I spent every moment I could in the local bushland and all of the native wildlife, the kookaburras, the blue-tongued lizards, the cockatoos, the snakes, you name it. That they were kind of my friends growing up, and then to see over time all of that being bulldozed and demolished for housing and the so-called growth economy, that is destroying our natural world. So that is really what enabled me to join the dots around the growth agenda of the major parties and our successive federal governments. That is actually undermining our natural world. That all comes through in our science, our State of the Environment reports, the Australian Academy of Science, that this growth agenda is actually undermining our life support system, the environment. So Sustainable Australia Party was formed, our first federal election was 2013. And we're an independent community movement from the political centre. We support a science and evidence-based approach to policy. We're not a left or right wing party, and we really are aiming in all of our campaigns to protect our environment, to stop overdevelopment, and to get to the heart of this issue, which is corruption in our political system, vested interests that are corrupting decisions around planning and around population growth. You probably know that Sustainable Australia Party is the only science-based and sensible voice.
Just 30 more seconds, William.
Thanks, Chris. You probably know that Sustainable Australia Party speaks about population, often misunderstood, but from a science and evidence-based perspective, we want to discuss that amongst the growth in consumption and economic growth that is actually undermining our environment. So we want to have a rational and mature discussion about that and redefine growth and determine genuine progress in human well-being, not just growth in consumption and population.
Thank you so much, William. And again, good sticking to time. Our next candidate is Kylie Tink. Over to you, Kylie.
Hi, and thank you so much. Firstly, thank you to both WEPA and the Nature Conservation Foundation for hosting this tonight. I can honestly say this is one of the Meet the Canada events that I've really been looking forward to. So thank you. I join you tonight from Camaragal land, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. So the thing to know about me is that I'm fundamentally running as an independent because I believe that our voice here in North Sydney deserves to be heard in Canberra, and that our electoral vote deserves to be cast in a way which is consistent with our community's values and our community's ambitions. I'm originally a country girl from the small town of Coonabarabran out in northwest New South Wales. So I literally did grow up in the bush. And in fact, for the first 5 years of my life, was raised by my grandmothers on what we would now consider subsistence farms. So having a really close relationship to land and country is something that I think fundamentally informs me. And I am one of those people, if I don't get out and spend time in the bush on a pretty regular basis, I go a little bit crazy, to be honest. So from my perspective, I didn't ever see myself entering politics, but there were a number of things that started to happen around me that I just couldn't ignore anymore. For the last 2 years, I've been working with vulnerable young Australians to help them get back on their feet. And what I began to notice is it didn't seem to matter what we did with them when we were putting them back up on their feet and facing them outwards. They were fundamentally looking into an uncertain society, an uncertain economic situation, and an uncertain environment. And as such, they were floundering and returning back to the fold. At the same time, I began to realise that really our federal government wasn't taking us forward anymore. We were stalled. And in fact, we've been stalled for about a decade now on positive legislative reform, as the two major parties are so focused on battling it out between themselves. They're no longer listening to the people that wanted to see those changes driven. So when I was asked by North Sydney's Independent to stand as a candidate for the electorate, I didn't hesitate to say yes, because it was around about the same time that not very long before that, I had heard our Prime Minister say that regardless of what the people of New South Wales wanted, a new gas power plant would be going into Kurri. I was devastated with that news, and I took a little bit of hope that originally the Labor Party said they would not proceed with that project. I guess my hope has since been dashed with the Labor Party coming out and confirming that they will also pursue that gas power plant in that community. And the reason it devastates me is because I know with every fibre of my body that our future is not a fossil fuel future. Our future is a sustainable and renewable energy future, and that's what we deserve to give our kids and give our communities. So I'm looking forward to speaking to everybody tonight and to hearing your questions. And I think this really is the moment in time. If we want to see a change, we must make that change, because nothing changes if everything stays the same. So let's change the climate in Canberra.
Thank you so much, Kylie. And our final candidate for the evening is Heather Armstrong from the Greens.
Thank you very much. And I'm speaking to you from Camaragal land at Hunters Hill, where I've lived since 2002. I did grow up at Drobroyd Point when some Crown land was released over there at Bargala Heights, when there were still goannas jumping through the bushland, walking down there to Grotto Point in the afternoons on weekends was beautiful. And I saw it gradually deteriorate as people built houses and moved in and intruded into the land, and it became basically somebody else's more or less backyard. I am a retired solicitor, and I retired in 2016, and I've been very happily working in bush regeneration projects, both through council here at Hunters Hill, but also on RMS land through my own initiative. We have a large regen patch over at Huntley's Point Road, where we've pretty much planted a forest, which is coming up. And I did that because I was just in despair about watching the degradation of our planet, watching inaction, hearing the Liberals and the coalition government mouth platitudes, mouth rubbish, the spin merchants coming out, the garbage that was being spoken. It was enraging. I had to do something to just stop this grief. And so I started my forest, and it gives me some consolation to go over there and just pull out weeds and try and create more bird habitat. So very keen bush regenerator. And now it seems I'm a keen politician, although I feel like an amateur, but nonetheless, I'm batting on. It's terribly important that we actually do something to stop this carnage, because Australia is facing a dire threat. Fossil fuels have to stop. We must have no more coal and gas mines, no more extraction of fossil fuels. Unfortunately, Labor, Liberal and coalition governments have both agreed on 114 new coal and gas projects, which is utterly disgraceful. One of those is the Beetaloo Basin gas fracking project over the Great Artesian Basin, which is also at risk from BHP trying to claim water rights for its own operations. This is a massive Australian resource which affects huge quantities of agricultural land, and it must not be tarnished and damaged by fracking and other mining activities, and yet that's what Liberals are allowing. In fact, it seems to me that the Coalition will pretty much allow any developer to do what they darn well like, and who cares about the environment. We've seen that with the watering down of the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Act. We've seen it with the abandonment of koalas in Campbelltown and on the Cumberland Plains. We've seen it with whenever there's a contest between the environment and the Coalition government or the state Liberal government, I know who's going to win. It's never nature. It's always the big business. We are completely... That's it?
No, keep going. You've got 30 more seconds.
Okay. So obviously, integrity and ICAC, a federal ICAC, will help to stop this, because what's funding it? Party political donations. It's basically paying the piper, and it's obviously corrupt. It must stop. I'm disgusted by it and just felt motivated to do something about it, which is why I'm here tonight. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Heather. And thanks to everybody for sticking to time very well. We did give everybody a bit of a cheat sheet. All the candidates before tonight were given 4 questions to give us some answers on, and they reflect the kinds of issues that a lot of people who are concerned about conservation in the North Sydney electorate care about. And those 4 questions are: number 1, what are your plans and or policies to deal with the challenges of climate change and the need to transition our electorate to a clean energy future? Number 2, will you commit to act to withdraw fossil fuel subsidies, and if so, which ones? Number 3, how will you ensure that the Commonwealth Government accepts its responsibility to protect, preserve and improve our unique flora and fauna for future generations and the well-being of our planet? And number 4, I know an issue very close to the hearts of many people around North Sydney, what is your position on the federal funding being provided for either the proposed Beaches Link Tunnel or the Western Harbour Tunnel? What would you do to represent the community's concerns to the state government? So each of the candidates will get 8 minutes now to answer those 4 questions, however they wish, and I will interrupt them at the 7-minute 30 mark to let them know they've got 30 seconds left to go. Catherine, back to you. Your answers to the 4 questions.
Thank you very much. So, climate change and clean energy and the Labor Party. Well, the most important point I think to make is that Labor has a 2030 target. It's a 43% reduction on 2005 level emissions. So that target is not as high as some of the others that you will hear about tonight. But the thing about this target that Labor has set is that it is entirely achievable, that it's been modelled to within an inch of its life, that it will create jobs, it will grow the economy, and it will ensure a just transition as we move forward towards a cleaner, greener future. So at the heart of Labor's policy is that we will have 82% of all our energy sourced from renewables by 2030. And then the Powering Australia plan details exactly how we will achieve that. And there are many, many planks to that. It's a whole of government, whole of economy revolution that's designed to get us where we need to go or very close to it. So the first thing we need to do is rewire the grid so that we can ensure efficient transmission of energy. And that Labor has a plan to do. It's a key plank of its infrastructure plan. We have a plan to source community batteries, and we had Chris Bowen in the electorate in February this year announcing that one of the first ones would be down there in Camaray. So that means that people who can't have solar panels on their roof, can't store their own electricity, they're in apartments, they're renting, will be able to access cheaper and more efficient energy. The Powering Australia policy will directly create 64,000 jobs and indirectly create 604,000 jobs. And it'll save small businesses and households $275 a year by 2025. Part of the plan involves encouraging the uptake of electric vehicles, reducing and eliminating the taxes imposed on those vehicles, and rolling out the infrastructure required to make the uptake of electric vehicles a normal part of consumer choice. It's attractive to people. Labor's is really the only plan on the table when it comes to a renewable energy future that will put us back in a position where the rest of the world can look at us without laughing again. As an educator, one of the key planks of the plan that I'm most attracted and supportive of is the plan that involves apprenticeships and education and investment in technology and research that we need to ensure our plan will actually be fruitful and beneficial to all of Australia. It has the support of the Farmers Federation, the unions, and the Business Council of Australia. And we ensure through the plan that we take care of the workers who are inevitably going to be left without jobs as we move towards a renewable future. And the point was made to me by our candidate in the Hunter recently that it's not just power stations closing more quickly than anticipated and people losing their jobs, but the automation of mining is also resulting in job losses, and that transition is something that was going to be necessary anyway. We're going to lead the way. Our own public service emissions will be net zero by 2030. And very exciting, and something that I hope will put us back in good stead with our neighbours and our members of the Pacific family, is that we have a plan to co-host a COP conference ourselves with our Pacific partners. In terms of ending fossil fuel subsidies, this has been one of the questions that I've wrestled with as a Labor Party member and as someone who is probably to the greener side of the Labor Party, a member of Labor's Environmental Action Network, etc. And what I have to return to on this question is the fact that when I was 13, it was Bob Hawke's championing of the Tasmanian dams that made me first want to become an international lawyer, and secondly, made me determined to be a member of the Labor Party, because Bob Hawke used international law to protect the environment, and he put it all on the line in a critical election standing against Malcolm Fraser. So Labor will always be the party that protects the environment when compared to the Liberal National Party coalition. And in this issue of fossil fuel subsidies, again, it is Labor that stands apart and alone from the coalition in its projects. And what Anthony Albanese has been very clear in saying is that there will be an ongoing role for gas as we transition towards a renewable future, but that the environmental and cost benefits of gas investments will have to stack up, and that they'll be funded by the private sector and not by taxpayers. So protecting flora and fauna, the Graham Samuel review made it devastatingly clear that we are absolutely not doing enough to protect our flora and fauna. I mean, this is a crisis situation, and the approach of the current government is to defer responsibility to the states. And Labor has said in its public policy platform that that's not good enough, that we do need to have reform of the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, and that will be something that Labor is committed to doing, to ensure that there's a centralised enforceable standard that companies and the states themselves have to meet in relation to any aspect of infrastructure or development or mining or protection of any species that's under threat. We know the devastation that's occurring. We know what's happening to koalas. We know what's happening to our reef. We know that our children are not going to see things that we were lucky enough to see. And I think I always assumed in the background that there was a benevolent hand acting to protect all of these things, but I now know very much that there's not. And so oh gosh, okay. I better get to the tunnels then, which is clear there is no federal funding for the Beaches Link project, and state Labor has said that the Beaches Link project is absolutely not one that it would pursue under any circumstances, that it would instead put attention and money into infrastructure in the western suburbs. And I totally agree with that as someone who teaches students who get to my university on substandard public transport. In relation to the Western Harbour Tunnel, I have spoken to Catherine King, the Shadow Infrastructure Minister, about this, and she said there is no federal funding for the Western Harbour Tunnel. It's not on Labor's list of infrastructure priorities.
Okay, Catherine, we might have to leave it there. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks a lot. Okay, next up, William, your answers to our 4 questions, please.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so really important questions, and obviously starting off with climate change and the transition, the massive transition required in our society. And again, science and evidence has to be at the forefront here. So the scientists are telling us that basically the viability of our society depends on leadership from government to limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. So you have to work backwards from there. You have to look at what is the scientific evidence showing us, and obviously the world's leading climate scientists are telling us that we need, all nations need to play their part. Australia needs to help to stay below that 1.5 degrees rise. We need to have a net zero by 2035. That's the latest at which we should be achieving that. If we are to play our part, we need to reduce emissions by at least 50% and realistically around 75% by 2030. Obviously a huge task, but that's what we need to do. So all countries and all regions need to play an important role in that. We also need to address, as I said before, the key drivers and the root causes of our growing consumption and impacts on the environment, which is growing consumption and population. That's what's been identified in successive state of the environment reports by our leading environmental scientists. That's what's been identified over decades by the Australian Academy of Science. So those 2 issues go hand in hand and need to be addressed as a matter of urgency. We obviously need to fund more research and development into renewable energies and as part of that process. So that I think responds to the first question. The second one was around fossil fuel subsidies, and actually absolutely we need to end fossil fuel subsidies. We need to have no new fracking, no new coal mines in Australia. So that's really where that sits at the moment. The third question was flora and fauna. So obviously our animals and our biodiversity are being squeezed out by the growth in human impacts on our environment. So we need a stronger Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act to properly protect Australia's environment and biodiversity, and that should include a much better, properly funded National Biodiversity and Native Species Program. Frankly, there's a good million jobs in that. We support a job guarantee program where any Australian who wants a job in environmental sustainability can get one, and that might be in revegetation, or it might be in managing and supporting native species. So that's a big policy for us, that job guarantee, and it can be in any Australian can apply for that job. I guess that sort of summarises the answer to that one. But yeah, the EPBC Act needs to be very, very considerably strengthened. In terms of resources, just more broadly, you know, the Earth, the scientists are telling us, could be inhabitable for another 1 billion or more years before the sun vaporizes the Earth. And yet a lot of our mining or mineral resources, such as iron ore in Australia, we think we've got plenty, but at current rates of extraction, it'll all be gone within 100 years. So that kind of puts things in perspective. So the transition to a sustainable future is not about changing from an internal combustion engine car to an electric vehicle. That creates a whole set of other environmental catastrophes in running down our non-renewable resources. What we need to do is sustainable and active transport. So Sustainable Australia Party is absolutely 100% opposed to any new mega roads to be built. Western Harbour Tunnel, Northern Beaches, you name it. We're also completely against new major airports being built, such as the Western Sydney Airport, obviously well underway now. But yeah, these new mega transport, unsustainable transport infrastructure is completely the wrong direction for our society. So we're completely against all of those types of major projects being built. And I think that kind of summarises those 4 questions, Chris, if I'm not wrong.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, William, and good job staying well and truly under time. Next up, Kylie. Let's hear from Kylie Tink.
Thank you. These are great questions, and in fact many of them have probably fundamentally informed why I'm running as an independent, because it was the opportunity to add a different voice around these issues that has really excited me. When it comes to talking about the plans and the policies that we have to deal with climate change, the reality is that the stance I've taken has been informed by science and by the people who are closer to this than anybody else. And I think it's really important that we recognise as a community that it's actually not the solutions or the answers that we lack. The reason we've had a decade of drift in terms of climate policy in this country is because we fundamentally have not had the political will, and we have not had the capacity to depoliticise climate policy in this country and build systems and frameworks that survive beyond any political change. So from that perspective, as North Sydney's independent, I'd be working hard to make sure that our federal structure actually leans into the answers that it already has to initiate the changes that we need to make ourselves a long-term sustainable and renewable economy. I'm a public supporter of Zali Steggall's climate bills because I believe those bills help us by building a framework that enables us to keep track of our carbon budget targets on a 10-year basis where they're reviewed every 5 years. The reason it's important to have a separate entity from the government keeping track of those targets is that it enables us to have an accountability factor built in to our country. And as I mentioned it before, it takes our climate policy out of the politicised system and ensures that there's a referee basically on the field, regardless of who's in politics. Part of those climate bills currently recommends the establishment of Climate Change Commission. The reality is that this could equally be replaced by the Climate Change Authority, which currently exists. Unfortunately, it's just been stripped of all of its power, again, through that movement between parties. The second thing that I am on public record for is, as North Sydney's independent, I would table a private members bill to introduce vehicle and fuel emission standards here in Australia. The reason it's important they are legislated is because at the moment Australia is running on some of the dirtiest vehicles and the dirtiest petrol in the world. And the simplest way to move that on is to introduce vehicle and fuel emission standards. In fact, we're the only Western nation in the world that doesn't already have them. And it's why you cannot buy an electric vehicle in Australia at the moment. I've heard the people of North Sydney say very clearly, you do not want any new coal or gas projects. And in fact, all the science and economics shows us that we have more than enough gas coming out of the ground already to be able to operate as a sovereign nation. And I do support ending subsidies on a transitional basis. And I guess the thing I'm most excited about is actually there's a group of about 25 or 30 people that are gathered around this push to get an independent Canberra, who have identified the reality that we can actually make the federal seat of North Sydney one of the first true net zero urban energy zones in the country. And the reason that's so important is because not only would it reduce our carbon emissions and our living costs, but if North Sydney can do it, anyone can do it. And I'd just like to share with you some modelling that was actually done today for me by Sol Grother from Rewiring Australia. There's currently just over 73,000 homes across the North Sydney electorate, and those homes on average own 1.4 cars. If we can realise this electrified future for North Sydney, every household will save $3,600 in a year. If you drill that down to Lane Cove as a suburb in and of itself, there's 13,500 dwellings. If we electrify everything, every household will save $3,900 a year. So it is definitely worth something that is worth us pursuing, and it's something that we have within our capacity to do as a community. In terms of the withdrawal of fossil fuel subsidies, the reality is I would support withdrawing all of them. We have a clear policy position on no new coal or gas projects, and that would mean an immediate end to project-based subsidies such as the Kurri Kurri gas power plant. Fuel taxes are not linked, despite what the major parties might want us to believe. They're not linked to road funding, and as it's commonly suggested, recipients of this subsidy. Most fuel tax credits go towards the mining industry and should simply be removed or phased out. There are also tax credits for aviation fuel, which we can look to phase out, particularly as the aviation industry moves towards biodiverse petrols. The federal government's project commitments include discounted loans on LNG projects by the Export Finance Australia at $698 million, and financial support to fossil fuel related projects through the Northern Australian Infrastructure Facility, another $317 million. Grants for new diesel fuel storage is $204 million, and there's a range of other projects, including those under JobMaker and what's become known as the gas-fired recovery. The reality is all of that financial resource is waiting to be diverted into renewable and sustainable energy projects, and that's what we should be fighting for as a community. How will I ensure the Commonwealth Government accepts responsibility to protect and improve our unique flora and fauna? I actually do believe that it is the federal government's responsibility to do three things. The first is lead, to set very clear indicators to both our domestic market and our international market. The second is to coordinate across states and territories. And the third is to provide stimulus, whether that's economic stimulus, intellectual stimulus, or human capital stimulus. The Samuel Review had 38 recommendations, which included the legally enforceable national environmental standards. And that provides our best shot at long-term protection of the environment. I think for us in this electorate, we should be particularly concerned that one of our state members, that being Anthony Roberts, recently walked back a lot of good work that had been done by Rob Stokes. And if elected as your independent member, I would have the power to take our federal voice back to the New South Wales government to say how unhappy we are with that and the fact that it must be reversed. I also agree with the Samuels Review that a clearer and stronger accountability for regulatory enforcement is needed, as well as much better data and a stronger role for our Indigenous communities. And to that point, I actually, on behalf of North Sydney, if I'm elected, I have signed on to support the program which is called Country Needs People, which is about reconnecting First Nations people to land and actually looking to them to help us with our sustainable and renewable approaches. In terms of the Western Harbour and Northern Beaches links, I've been pretty vocal from the time I announced as a candidate. I actually have called for the suspension of both of them immediately. And I think it is really important that we recognise that they are, in fact, one project. There is no sound business case for either of those projects. And in fact, the work that I've seen done is that it will cost the New South Wales government $888 million per kilometre to build those projects should they choose to proceed. The reality is those projects cannot proceed without federal funding. And I think that's why it's imperative we send an independent voice, because an independent voice must be able to call out to either party in power and hold them to account for budgets suddenly becoming available to make those projects possible. That is the power I would have as an independent, because my voice can always be heard in the House of Reps rather than it being left on a backbench or stuck in a caucus.
Thank you so much, Kylie. And finally, Heather. Heidi, we just need Heather's audio.
Okay, sorry, I fixed that. Yeah, thank you. Sorry. So there's a reason why the Pacific Islands, the alliance of small island states, had a catch cry of 1.5 to stay alive, because they are going underwater. We know that the International Panel on Climate Change has said that we must achieve no greater global warming than 1.5 degrees Celsius. 2 degrees is just erring on irresponsible. So we need to get cracking absolutely now. There's no time to waste. So we have to stop these outrageous subsidies to coal and gas industries and stop taking coal and gas out of the ground. This must stop immediately, and there must be no new coal and gas projects. We must publicly fund the transition to renewable energy, and the Greens have a project to do that. So I'm off mute, aren't I? Yep.
Yep.
Good.
Right.
So there's something on my screen telling me to unmute. So we have to have a manufacturing revolution, really, and move from dirty fossil fuel industries into clean energy industries. There are so many opportunities to do that, and the Greens have a project and a plan to create many clean new environmental industries which are sustainable and which will help to employ those who are needing to transition out of dirty industries. This can be funded by the Greens' proposal to tax billionaires, put a mining tax on billionaires, sorry, and to stop the movement of money offshore from the big companies, which are really tax minimizing or tax avoiding, so they avoid all tax. I mean, Exxon has about half of coal resources in Australia, which it's extracting, and it pays no tax in Australia. So we really need to have a good, clear look at what's going on with our coal industry, and make sure that these foreign-owned companies aren't just bleeding us dry for no benefit to Australians. We need to, of course, increase domestic measures to allow more battery use in homes, to transform the grid, to enable more capture of and transmission of renewable energy. We need to build more renewable energy sources. So that's terribly important. So those are an outline of what we would be doing. In relation to fossil fuel subsidies, of course, I've already answered that. There should be none. They should be withdrawn. And there should not be a grandfathering or a phasing out period. There's no justification for it. This has been corruption of government. We have a captive government. It should stop immediately. And there needs to be no more fossil fuel subsidies. To ensure that the government accepts its responsibility to protect and preserve our unique flora and fauna for generations to come and the well-being of the planet, the Graham Samuels report, of course, is excellent. I made submissions to that report, and I completely support the recommendations he makes, in particular the emphasis on broadening the scope of approvals under remodelled environmental planning legislation to allow a greater landscape approach rather than just this piecemeal one-by-one approvals approach, which doesn't allow an overview which is consistent with environmental preservation. You might have a project beside a river here which damages it downhill, or sand dredging here which damages the river further on down. These things must be taken as a coherent whole in terms of landscape, not just individual projects. So we need to adopt that recommendation. But the fundamental thing is that the feds have got to stop shifting responsibility to the states. It's the same sort of corporate outsourcing approach they take in general. We don't actually govern, we just hire consultants to do it for us. We outsourced a lot to somebody else and we just manage them and pay them lots of money. That has to stop. Who's under the most pressure to give in to developers and to miners? It's those at the state level. So that's precisely the level of government where you've got the most pressure not to adhere to decent environmental standards, not to protect the environment. And that's what the federal government is failing to take responsibility for. So I completely endorse Samuel's report and its requirement that there be a federal overriding authority and enforcement of it. And as a former federal prosecutor, I can tell you that an unenforced law is not a law. Last time I did a prosecution for the Department of Environment, they had one investigator. Gives you an idea of the hollowing out of the public service that's been going on. No enforcement, no law. Forget it. Do what you like. That must stop. We need to have proper enforcement. The next question was, Oh, the last question. Federal funding for the tunnel. Well, clearly, I think there is some federal funding. I'm not sure, Catherine, you said that there wasn't, but I think there has been a suggestion that there has been some federal funding for it. And if there has been, there shouldn't be. It is clearly a state project, so the federal government has limited responsibility other than to basically finance it if it is. If so, that must stop, because this, I was reading a long detailed report by road transport body that's a few years old now, but nonetheless I was really horrified at the carnage that this project is going to inflict on the surrounding areas. And there's not just the 3,000 mature trees, but all the toxic sediment that's going to be lifted from the harbour, from the drilling and so forth. It's going to do huge damage to marine life. And the disturbance of contaminated sites, there's no proper, but the EIS itself, of course, has been inadequate and it's been rushed through. And I saw some early press releases saying this was going to be a wonderful public transport initiative. Well, that died. And so did Ms. Berejiklian's promise that there would be no unfiltered smokestacks. That also died. So it's a funny thing that now we've got just another transurban huge tunnel, more pollution, more damage, and more profit to the private sector. Really, you have to just stop this movement into the private sector of all government projects. But this project should never have been conceived of in the first place. It is a disgrace. And I speak as somebody who's sat in that split bridge traffic for a long time and cursed like everybody else does. But the fact is, this project is destructive and must be stopped. We really have very strong public transport policies as part of our initiatives. And we, of course, advocate that public transport should be the way of the future. But you also want to put money into bicycle ways. And we have costed policies for public transport and bicycle ways to try to encourage people to get out of cars and stop this destruction of our environment through fossil fuel pollution. So I think that summarises my answers to those questions, but we really have to stop the federal government from encouraging or endorsing or not stopping these ecologically disastrous projects, particularly in the face of such staunch local opposition, because I think WEPA has done a fantastic job. Take my hat off to you for trying to stop this and for doing the work you've done, because it's difficult, technical, and it does require a lot of work. So thank you for doing that work, and all power to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heather. And thanks to all the candidates for their answers to those questions. It's certainly important that voters get to hear what folks have got to say before they get elected, because once people get there, we've got 3 years of this Parliament looking after the future of the country. So thank you. The next part of the program is to open it up for a bit of question and answer, but this is not the ABC, so we're not quite equipped to have everybody just jump in, and I'm certainly not Tony Jones or whoever it is that runs the joint these days. But in a moment, I'm going to throw to Christina, who will carefully select from the variety of questions I can see here on the chat to put to our candidates. But I'm going to open the batting when it comes to questions, as is my prerogative as the MC. So this is a question to all of the candidates. When there's quite a big, they say that there's quite a big difference between campaigning and governing, that you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose, and getting to Canberra is quite a different thing to what you might say on the streets of North Sydney in the 33 days before polling day. So my question to you all is, if you were to be elected, how would you go about working within the Parliament to actually achieve some of the things that you are clearly so passionate about, rather than just speak about them? So I'll go back to the order that we have been using all evening. So Catherine, then William, then Kylie, then Heather.
Thank you for that question. So I am a very, very passionate believer in the power of a political party to achieve things for the common good, for the country, for the people of a nation, and for communities. The only way we do achieve anything in life and in politics is to come together around a shared goal, an ideal, and a project, and work together on it with our different skills and and talents to get a job done. And when you're a member of a political party, you have a basic governing ideal. So ours is equality and fairness and solidarity in the achievement of common goals. And as a member of the Labor Party, I have been a part of the democratic process that has worked from the branches up to achieve an environmental policy to take to this election that I am passionately 100% committed to, because it will actually do what is required. So when I think of what Labor is aiming to do, which is to restore our international credibility on the climate stage by a series of educational, infrastructural, economic reforms that are necessary to achieve a renewable economy, I'm 100% sure that I will have a role in doing all of that and in making sure that North Sydney is a part of that as a member of the Labor Party. And I think we can't underestimate just how big the task ahead of us is. It's in line with the
I
major...
just need to wrap up a bit from now, Catherine.
Oh, okay. It's in line with other epic reforms that were required that Labor parties in the past have grappled with and achieved. The economic reforms of the Hawke-Keating era is one of those. They're the sorts of massive undertakings, whole of nation project building enterprises that only a party can do, and that if I was the member for North Sydney, I certainly wouldn't be invisible on the backbench contributing to.
Thank you so much. William, same question.
Thanks, Chris. I guess that having now been elected as a politician, I have some experience in this because, yes, 6 months ago, I was one of those people that was seeking to be elected, and then I am. And what I've learned and what I knew is that you do have to compromise. You do have to take on board other people's viewpoints. I think it's important that you don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. That you do work with other candidates, parties, you name it. Sustainable Australia Party is an independent community movement. We don't, again, have a left or right wing bias. We want science and evidence to determine good policy. We might have a perfect world on something like housing affordability to get rid of all negative gearing. But if all we could achieve was to limit that to one house, that would be something that we would work towards and compromise on, because it would achieve a much better outcome than we have today, where tax concessions are driving housing speculation. So, yeah, I think it's really important that we don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And in North Sydney Council, I've been able to work with both sides, if you like, and all sides and all councillors to achieve good results so far.
Thank you, William. Kylie.
I think we're at an incredibly exciting tipping point in terms of our Australian political environment. And it has been incredible for me over the last 8 months to watch the federal seat of North Sydney become aware of its potential in terms of being a real voice in the House of Representatives. When our constitution was written in its early days, it was written by a group of disparate communities who identified that they needed a common place to be able to come together to then have robust discussions about the best way forward. Independents are not new in our Australian parliamentary environment. In fact, prior to 1940, they were more the norm. The two-party system is something that has grown up and over the last decade to 2 decades has become the dominant source in Australian politics. The reality is, whenever an independent goes into a federal parliamentary system, though, what they do is create the opportunity for uncomfortable conversations to be had. And arguably, Australia wouldn't even be talking about climate had Stigel not tabled her climate bills in the last term of government. Arguably, integrity has been driven by Helen Haines and Cathy McGowan. Andrew Wilkie drove effective gambling reform. Rebecca Sharkey passed the amendments to the Religious Discrimination Bill. And in the previous term of government, we saw Karen Phelps actually move Medivac and make it possible for us to treat asylum seekers with more respect. Cathy McGowan summed it up really nicely to me, because the reality is that while I may be only the second independent that might be sent to the House of Reps by the seat of North Sydney, I'm certainly not the first female independent to go. And Kathy McGowan, when I asked her how it worked, said the beauty of being an independent is that you're able to listen, process, and then move nimbly around the house and between the parties to get the job that needs to be done. And in fact, I think we see that when we look at the seat of Indi, look at the way that they've moved to their own electricity grid and their own power, look at the effect that's been able to be brought in and the voice that that seat now has in the seat. And so I would do what I do best, which is listen, learn, argue like I know I believe I'm right, but then actually listen like I know I'm wrong to make sure that we don't miss any opportunities to move forward with good, positive legislative change.
Thank you so much, Kylie. And finally, Heather.
It's difficult in the lower house unless there's a minority government for those sitting on the crossbench to have significant impact. I take on board the comments that Kylie made about the importance of having independents working nonetheless behind the scenes, trying to push their agenda and often succeeding. And that is good. And there is a capacity for those who otherwise don't have an influence over the decision-making in the lower house to nonetheless state an agenda and push the debate in a certain direction. And that's one thing the Greens have frequently done. And ideas that the Greens have put up long ago have somehow been able to be moved into the mainstream. So they can create a climate where new ideas become acceptable rather than just something regarded as silly and off-beam. So in that respect, even though there might not be any actual voting power in the lower house, nonetheless, there can be a setting of an agenda which has an effect. In the upper house, however, we are hoping, with the addition of David Shoebridge, who's moving from the Legislative Council of New South Wales to stand for the Senate, to have 12 senators, 12 Green senators in the upper house and the Senate. And if so, that would be a significant block, which would wield power. And if there is a minority government, of course, then there is all that negotiating and there is all that change making that can go on. Take on board the comments that William made in relation to the fact that one has to be reasonably flexible, can't necessarily get everything you want, but nonetheless, there's power there to be wielded. There's no great drama or excitement about having minority governments. Germany, France, European companies have done this for a long, long time. It gives you a better, less adversarial system. And what's wrong with Australia, with the duopoly of coalition and Labor, is this nasty, highly adversarial, really toxic environment, which grows out of this duopoly. What we need is a civilised, around the table approach, and a minority government would only help to achieve that. So that's the way to move from adversarial stagnation and just people just yelling at each other to actually getting things done, negotiating in a civilised way.
Thank you so much, Heather. Now, I'm going to introduce my co-host here, Christina, who has been trawling through the chat to identify the best questions, and we're going to read some of them out. All the questions won't be answered necessarily by all of the candidates. I'll make a judgment about which candidates the questions are directed to. And we'll get through as many as we possibly can, but as you can see for yourself on the chat, there are quite a few there to get through by the time everybody gets to have a say. So don't despair if you haven't had a chance to have your question asked. Know that I'm sure all of the candidates would happily answer them through their emails and other communications channels. But Christina, what's our first question?
Oh, okay. Well, there's actually a number of questions, and we had a number of questions as well. So there's lots around all the different headings that you brought up around those 4 questions that you answered initially. But I'm going to ask a couple of questions to start off with around the tunnels, because that's our big ticket local issue, of course. So someone in the chat asked, of Kylie, I note your comments against the Western Harbour Tunnel and Beaches Link and that the business case does not stack up. Why then a call for a suspension to the project as opposed to scrapping the project altogether in its current form?
Yeah, look, it's a subtle difference, isn't it? And I think the reason I called for a suspension is because I think we do need to recognise as a community that we do need solutions to the issues that we are facing, and that is significant congestion so our federal seat of North Sydney runs all the way from Gladesville and Hunters Hill in the west all the way around through to Cremorne and Neutral Bay. So while we sit here tonight in the Camaray and Northbridge area, the fact of the matter is that a third of our electorate is in the other side of the freeway. So quite deliberately, I called for a suspension because I would love to see our federal government actually invest in projects that make it easier for us to move around our electorate, just not these projects. What I have learnt about negotiation is when you call for a hard stop and give yourself nowhere to go, you have nowhere to move in terms of bringing people along. I have no intention of backing these two projects in the form that they currently exist. But I am, as I said, a really vocal advocate of we still need solutions. As I mentioned before, the most congested 4 kilometres of road in the country is the 4 kilometres that runs from the northern end of the Harbour Bridge out to the Artarmon exit. We can't just ignore that as a community. So if there's a way of us being able to work within this system to get a solution that does better meet our needs, that doesn't involve the destruction of thousands of trees and the annihilation of Flat Rock Gully, then I think I would be speaking fairly for our community in saying we want that solution. We just don't want this that's currently being proposed. Everyone on this call knows the 2 tunnels are a 1970s solution for a 21st century problem. So, and I'm not going to back those projects in, but I do want to ensure that resources come into our electorate to address the significant transport issues that we have.
Okay. Thanks, Kylie. Okay, so and just following on that from that one to everyone, what could you do if you were to become the federal member of North Sydney to bring in legislation to protect Sydney Harbour and Middle Harbour from environmentally damaging infrastructure projects such as the Western Harbour Tunnel and Beaches Link? Because both of those harbours, I guess Sydney Harbour and Middle Harbour, are under risk environmentally from the tunnels.
Was that a question directed to anyone in particular,
No,
Christina?
no. So it's just general. So you choose.
Okay, we might just hear from others. So perhaps Catherine, have you got an answer on that? And just for the candidates in general, just for these questions, if you could try to keep your answers to just about 30 seconds or a minute so that we can get through as many as we can.
Well, I described earlier the 1983 Tasmanian dams case, which is when the federal government used an international convention to implement domestic legislation to carry out an environmental purpose to protect something. So there are extreme litigation measures that one could use if one was in federal parliament to stop projects that were gravely perilous to the environment. But that is obviously an extreme measure that you would hope by action under other existing legislation you would not need to resort to. So I think that one thing that came out of the Samuel review is that it was the case that we needed stronger protection at the federal level that the states were forced to comply with whenever they proposed infrastructure projects like the tunnels, but that we also needed much more efficient and better management of environmental assessment. So the big criticism from business and industry was lawfare and green taping around projects. And so one of Labor's commitments, and it's a really important one, is not just to up the level of scrutiny on infrastructure projects like this from the federal level, but also to up the efficiency and transparency levels so that determinations are carried out much more effectively and efficiently. And that's something that is eminently sensible, but for the sorts of reasons that we heard from Heather, has just not been forthcoming at all over the past 9 years with the Liberal National Party coalition in power.
Thanks, Catherine. Heather, did you want to chime in there?
Yes, look, unfortunately, transport, this sort of thing is a state matter, but you know, you will recall Bob Hawke's intervention into the Tasmanian dam situation. That was done under the external affairs power in the Constitution. There's a limited power for the Commonwealth, speaking as a lawyer, to intervene in state matters, unless you're relying upon the external affairs power and treaties we have signed pursuant to that power. So, for example, the Ramsar Treaty enables the Commonwealth to protect wetlands and so forth. So if his external affairs power invoked, pursuant to our having signed a treaty, then off you go. You can enforce that treaty and say that's contrary to what we've signed, and so the feds override the states and it stops or is amended or whatever. But we can't just, federal government just can't move into every state project and say, sorry, we don't like what you're doing, stop it now. There needs to be a particular head of constitutional power or some other arrangement between the federal government and the state government, something which enables some kind of execution of that power. So I'd need to have a closer look at it, but I can't think of anything at the moment that say there's a problem with this contamination from dredging and so forth going on. What could the federal government do about that pursuant to the Environmental Preservation and Biodiversity Conservation Act? Well, maybe there would be some power to stop that kind of contamination pursuant to provisions of that act, but as we know, it has very little teeth and doesn't really do much as it is. So I doubt that there could be much done.
Thanks, Heather. William, did you want to chime in on that one?
Yeah, definitely. I think it comes back to the big growth agenda. Our economy is fundamentally, I think, run by the big infrastructure and the property industries, and they're looking for projects that obviously are profitable for them. And to do that, they need growth in vehicle numbers and population and all those things to feed all of those massive infrastructure projects. So again, it just comes back to the key drivers as outlined in the State of the Environment reports of growing consumption, car use, population, all those types of things. Unless we address those key drivers of big infrastructure projects, we're sort of chasing our tail on a lot of those types of issues. But at the same time as addressing those things, we also need to obviously transition our behaviours away from driving cars and putting much better transport systems in place, like rapid bus networks could be put in very, very easily and efficiently compared to heavy rail or metros and so forth. They can use current infrastructure like roads or cycleways. We can put those in very easily, and they're the sort of transitions we need to make fairly quickly to take the pressure off those big infrastructure projects.
Thanks very much, William. Kylie, did you want to chime in on that one? You got on that one. Christina.
Okay, this is a question around climate change and directed to Catherine Renshaw. So why did Labor side with the Liberals to stop Stigel's climate bill being debated, given the UK Climate Change Committee has been effective?
Well, there are massive differences, obviously, between the UK and Australia. The UK is a unitary system, where obviously we're a federal system. So the management of our climate policy, as well as everything else, is totally different to the UK. Other than that, a very big, important difference in Labor's view was the fact that the Stigel bill outsourced responsibility for achieving climate change to an expert panel. And this is something that the Climate 200 independents have been saying quite a lot, and Labor fundamentally disagrees with. We think that climate action is so important that ministers, members of cabinet, should be responsible and accountable for the promises they make in relation to achieving action on climate change. So if there's a failure under the Westminster system we have of responsible government, it's attributed to a minister who heads a department, and they're politically accountable for what happens. It's totally different to the UK system that we have for climate change in that respect. So there are, obviously you would all know about the problems with energy security that there are in the UK as well. So Australia's in a privileged position in some ways that we can learn from the experience of other countries around the world in what works and in what doesn't. And I think that the energy crisis that we saw in the UK, where it was the poorest and most vulnerable people who were most hit by high energy costs and energy insecurity, is not something that the Labor Party would want to see replicated.
Thanks, Catherine. Kylie, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to let everybody know, actually, the Labor candidates on the parliamentary subcommittee supported debate for Zali Steggall's climate bill. So there are 8 people on the parliamentary subcommittee. It was actually the Liberal National Coalition group of 5 who blocked debate on the bill. So when Zali's bills were first tabled, the Labor members of that parliamentary subcommittee actually supported those bills being debated. And I think we hear it in Catherine's telling of that story. And because the reality is nobody's saying those bills are perfect. And I think they definitely can be reworked. But the reality is the political will was being driven by an independent. And I will, give the Labor Party their due here. They were prepared to support those bills being debated. It was the Liberal National Party that blocked those bills from being debated. So I think it would be an extraordinary experience to have the opportunity as an independent to then negotiate with, a sensible party structure to bring about that depoliticisation of climate science going forward.
Thanks, Kylie. Christina, we've got another question.
Yep, we do. It's around clean energy. So whilst the Labor Party is better than the current government, this is what someone's put in the chat, I have not heard of their coal mines or fracking policies. Can we trust Labor to act with urgency on climate?
That sounds an awful lot like a question to Catherine, so why don't we throw to you, Catherine?
Yes.
It does sound like a question for me, and I have spoken a lot to Chris Bowen and to the team about the climate emergency, because when I was talking to them about whether I should run or not, there are a couple of things that I was concerned about. And one of them was that they were going to support the contest for North Sydney, that they thought North Sydney was a seat that was worth fighting for the Labor Party. They said yes to that. And then I said, well, I'm not going to stand for Labor unless you have a 2030 target that's respectable. And they said, we will, just wait, we'll announce it. And they did that. And then I thought, is the sense of urgency that I feel and the anger that I felt after watching Glasgow present in all of the front bench shadow ministers that are going to be responsible for driving forward the change we need? And it's Tanya, it's education, and it's Tony Burke, it's all of the employment, it's all of the elements of the front bench that are going to have to achieve what we need. And I have to say that it absolutely is. Even just down at the polling station at Crow's Nest again with the deputy leader, with Richard Miles, watching the people go into the booth, they were still asking, is Labor's climate change policy good enough? Can I trust you on this? And the polls were coming out showing it looking more like a stable Labor majority government. And then the question became, well, should North Sydney be a part of this or not? And Richard was unequivocal in saying, yes, Labor's going to get the job that's required to be done with all urgency. My personal hope is that we better the 43% on 2005 level emissions. But that's a firm target.
Thanks, Catherine. Christina, next question.
Yeah, thank you. This is along those lines of what you just said. We're hearing from climate researchers that warming beyond 1.7 degrees will likely result in the death of the Great Barrier Reef and Ningaloo Reef, as well as leading to far more extreme heat and weather events. So it's been asked, the Labor Party's target of 43% emissions cut by 2030 will result in 2 degrees of warming, putting us out of step with the goals of the Paris Agreement. So I guess you have answered that a bit, Catherine, but did you want to add to that?
I suppose I can go a little bit further and just talk about Labor's plan. And there was a question earlier, I think, about, where's the vision? I think you, Chris, said, you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose, and there hasn't been a lot of poetry in this election campaign. And the reason there's no dramatic poetry in Labor's climate change policy, no grand Greens target of, or William Burke's very ambitious climate target, is because the Labor Party and Chris Bowen was so determined to nail down the precise results of every single lever and trigger in the economy and education and infrastructure and rewiring the grid that would result from everything they did, so that we could be economically secure and ensure a just transition as we did this very important work. So it's not dramatic targets, and it's real economic reform that will achieve a certain target that we have to admit a lot of the states have already bettered. This is the federal government saying, we'll go to COP27 next year with a defensible 2030 target that puts our nation back in the race for 1.5. And we've got the actual commitment, the investment to make at least this happen.
Thanks, Catherine. I might just allow the other candidates just to briefly address the question of emissions reduction targets just real quick. William, do you want to kick off?
I'm okay with that one, Chris. I think I've made it my position clear earlier. We have to start and finish with the science.
Thanks, William. Heather, did you want to say anything?
Yes, that the International Panel on Climate Change would not agree with Catherine. We have to have far more ambitious climate, fossil fuel reduction, carbon dioxide atmospheric reduction plans than the Labor Party has put forward. And that proposal that the Labor Party's put forward will only result, say, in the further degradation of our Pacific neighbours, and Indonesia becoming a failed state because it simply has too much rising sea level to allow it to produce food. So there are significant problems with these so-called well-costed, well-organised, micro-managed targets. They're just not good enough. And there's hundreds of scientists who've said so, pursuant to the Sixth International Panel on Climate Change report. So we just have to be ambitious. We can be ambitious. We can think big, and we can stop all that money going into fossil fuels, all that money going into the private sector for destructive programs, be funneled into new manufacturing, transformative manufacturing. We can create a new Australia, and it can be done. And we can stop the destruction of our climate. But we need to be ambitious, we need to be brave. It needs to be a social change as well. We need to change our lifestyles as well. So this is something that we have to personally and governmentally address. We must do it. The International Panel on Climate Change.
I'm just going to stop you there, Heather. We need to keep moving. Thank you for that. And Kylie, did you want to say a couple of words?
Only that I think that this is where an independent voice for North Sydney can ensure that the conversation is constantly evolving, and that whichever party is in power is held to account. I understand what Catherine says about how Labor have come to their number at 43%. We know that there are more ambitious targets out there being advocated for by the Climate Council and other independent, scientifically based organisations. I actually think, as I said, that's why with an independent voice on the crossbench, we can keep calling out the major party and make sure that the conversation is happened in a parliamentary space rather than behind closed doors in a party caucus room. And you'll know exactly what the North Sydney voice is contributing to when it comes to that debate.
Thank you, Kylie. And Christina, this will be the last question of the night. I think we're rapidly running out of time, but who gets the final gong?
Well, this is an interesting one that is to all of you. Will you support the development of a truly independent planning body whereby projects are only funded if there is a clear national interest in alignment with our climate goals and that interest is transparently demonstrated?
Now, in the interests of, it's 5 to 9 and we allow these good people to get home at night. Well, you're already home, but go to bed or eat your dinner at 9 o'clock. So in the interest of time, candidates, can we keep this down to 30 seconds? Kylie, Tink.
Yeah, the short answer is yes. I believe what's missing in government at the moment is integrity, accountability and perspective. So to have a healthy government, we need a strong opposition, we need a healthy independent media, and we need a healthy public service that survives beyond any political reign. So that's what this is all about, is bringing integrity back into a truly representative democracy.
Kylie, Catherine Renshaw.
At the state and federal level now, there are institutions and laws that say every single infrastructure project we do should be in the public interest and should meet environmental standards and have a common good purpose. This is our money, and the purpose is to serve the people of Australia. So the problem we've had is that for 9 years, there has been a government that has acted in opposition to its own scrutiny laws and to the common good outcomes of the people. It's been a government full of rorts and abuses of the system that hasn't done its job in following the regulations that already exist. So I'm a supporter of transparency, and I'm a supporter right now of every single thing we do, every project, every tunnel, having a clear purpose of serving the common good, not the interests of a multinational or an interest group. And I think that I would support making sure we have working properly what we already have before we create new institutions to oversee things. But I mean,
I'm going to get you to stop there, Catherine,
okay,
because we're rapidly running out of time. William.
Yeah, the short answer is Sustainable Australia Party's got a few policies in this regard around, firstly, enshrining into Australian law the fundamental human right of a healthy natural environment. So that would be prioritised in all development decisions. We need Independent National Sustainability Commission to plan and report on environmental standards. We need Environment Protection Agency, a federal agency with teeth, as they say. And we need to enshrine principles of ecological and economics. So it's about redefining growth. We talk about redefining growth to prioritise health and well-being rather than economic consumption. And you know, sustainability is a part of, and a healthy environment is really what we want to grow rather than economic consumption. So the short answer is yes.
Thank you so much, William. And finally, Heather.
Yes, we have a productivity commission and we have other infrastructure bodies, but they, as Catherine noted, tend not to be particularly helpful when politicians just use what they call ministerial discretion to override well-costed, well-thought-out projects and just say fine. Nonetheless, train stations are going to get car parks here. So the rorting can be done under ministerial discretion, or so they say. Personally, I doubt that it's a matter of law, but on the environmental side, of course, the Samuels report recommends that we do have an Office of Compliant, National Office of Compliant and National Standards, which are to be set and to be observed across the board by every department. So this is not just for the Department of Agriculture and Environment, or whatever it's called, is to be observed by every national government department. So that's an essential component of good government. I agree with that proposition.
Thank you so much, Heather. And thank you to all of the candidates for your participation tonight and for the good faith way in which you've approached all of the questions and all of the answers. We really do appreciate it. I think I speak for everybody when I say thank you to the 4 people who've come to join us tonight. To everybody else, thank you for being here as well on behalf of WEPA, that is the Willoughby Environment Protection Association. I hope I got that right. And the Nature Conservation Council of New South Wales. Thank you for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. If you want to learn more about NCC, the Nature Conservation Council, you can go to nature.org.au. If you want to learn more about each of the candidates, I'm sure your letterboxes are being stuffed with their materials every single day, and their volunteers are out on every street corner every single day. So I'm sure they won't be hard to find, and your phone is being bombarded with messages and everything else. But I'm sure they'll be more than happy to answer all of your questions. And with that, John, I might throw back to you for the farewell.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, look, thanks everybody for coming. I hope people found it informative. I'm sure the candidates would be happy to take any questions that haven't already been answered that you have, and you can certainly email WEPA at wepa.org.au in that regard, or I'm sure there are ways you can email the candidates directly. I might just encourage people, inform people that the Nature Conservation Council has produced all these terrific bin stickers and posters that people can obtain from us. And I might get, yes, thanks, Christina's showing that's the bin sticker and that's the poster. So we have heaps of them, and so you can get them from us. And so that's it for this evening. Thanks again for coming. Remember that WEPA membership is very cheap. I encourage everybody to join. Our strength is in our numbers. The more members we have, the more influence we have. And that's it for the night. I'd like to thank all the candidates. Thank you for coming. And thank you, Chris, for emceeing it. And thank you to all our WEPA wonderful people in the background who've been doing all tech support, such as Heidi and Meredith and Christina. And that's it for this evening.
We do want a photo, John.
Oh, and we do want a photo. Sorry, I forgot about that. Everybody who's prepared to stay on and be in a photo so we can show that this has been a successful event. Can you turn on your video, and Heidi will take a snap.
I'll just wait a moment for people who are prepared to come on. Thank you.
Yep.
That's great. I think we'll do that. Okay, thank you, everybody. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thank
No,
you. Good night.
Yeah,
Best of luck to all the candidates.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.